Classic rock. Those two words probably make you think of epic guitar riffs, stadium-filling anthems, and your dad insisting that they just don't make music like this anymore. But the other day, I was listening to a UK radio station, and I heard them describe Arctic Monkeys as classic rock. And I nearly choked on my breakfast. You remember the band, right?
I bet that you look good on the dance floor. I don't know if you're looking for romance or I don't know what you're looking for.
This stopped me in my tracks. When did 2006 become ancient history? How is this possible? And when did I become so old? But it's not just the Arctic Monkeys. Some people are even calling bands like Coldplay and Linkin Park classic rock. And, well, that kind of makes sense. So when exactly does a band or artist become classic rock? Is it based on a time period? Do they have to be around a certain number of years? Is it a sound or a vibe kind of thing? Or is it something else completely different? And if this pattern continues, does that mean in 20 years' time we're going to be referring to people like Post Malone as classic rock? Let's take a look into this. The birth of classic rock. Back in the actual golden era of rock, the 1960s and the 1970s, there was no such thing as classic rock. It was just called rock. The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, this was the mainstream sound of the time. Rock was king. But by the late 1970s and early 80s, a problem emerged.
This is Houston. Say again, please.
Houston, we have a problem.
What do we do with all this old rock music now that new artists like Van Halen and U2 are taking over? Enter classic rock radio.
Classic rock the way it was meant to be enjoyed. On dust.
The term classic rock was first popularized by radio programmers in the early 80s. It was used to describe stations that focused on the biggest rock hits of the 60s and 70s. At first, it was just a marketing term, a way to keep playing Led Zeppelin and The Who without competing with newer rock bands. Simple enough, right? But over the decades, something weird happened. The expanding definition. By the 1990s, classic rock stations weren't just playing the 60s and 70s anymore, they were adding bands from the 80s. Suddenly, artists like Guns N' Roses, AC/DC, and Bon Jovi were being called classic rock. By the 2000s, things got even stranger. Now grunge bands like Nirvana, Pearl Jam, and Soundgarden were making their way into the classic rock rotation. Hold on, Nirvana? The band that literally destroyed hair metal and signified the end of old school rock music, they're now classic rock? And now here we are in the 2020s, where bands like Foo Fighters, Green Day, and even Linkin Park are starting to be labelled as classic rock. At this point, it's clear, classic rock is evolving. But what is actually driving this shift? The 3 rules of classic rock. So after digging into this a little bit, I found there are 3 rules on how to define what classic rock music is. The first one is the 20 to 25 year rule. This rule says that a band must be at least 20 to 25 years old to be considered classic rock. So, by that logic, Nirvana, first album, 1991, classic rock. Green Day, first album, 1994, classic rock. Linkin Park, 2000. Well, yeah, they're pretty much there now. The Killers, 2004. Well, yeah, that could be classic rock. And if we follow this rule, the Arctic Monkeys, who had their first album in 2006, are well on their way to becoming classic rock. The sound test. Others argue that classic rock isn't just about age, it's about having a specific sound. So Classic rock is typically guitar-driven, influenced by blues or hard rock, and it's kind of anthems made for big stadiums. But this theory gets tricky, because by this logic, Coldplay, who have been around for, well, over 25 years, they wouldn't be classic rock, but a newer band like Greta Van Fleet, who sound basically exactly like Led Zeppelin, they would be classic rock. So is classic rock just a vibe now? The dad effect. So let's be honest, sometimes a band becomes classic rock when your parents start listening to it, which in my house when I was growing up would make, let's see, Queen, The Animals, and Beethoven classic rock. But here's a terrifying truth. We have now become the parents. If you grew up in the early 2000s, guess what? That music is now nostalgia fuel for a whole new generation. The same way that our parents played Eagles and the Beatles, we're out here playing Linkin Park and Green Day. And some teenager is rolling their eyes thinking, ugh, old people music. This is a circle of life, my friends. Arctic Monkeys are already dad rock, and soon they will be classic rock, and there is nothing we can do about it. So here's the issue. If classic rock is just defined as older rock music, then what's to stop it including, well, everything? In 10 years, will Imagine Dragons be classic rock? In 20 years, will Billie Eilish be classic rock? Are we heading for a future where TikTok artists like Benson Boone are on classic rock playlists? I mean, this for me is completely unimaginable. It's not possible. Right? You see, the problem is that eventually the term classic rock loses all meaning. Does it even matter? At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if your music has been labeled as classic rock. For some artists, being classic rock is a sign that their music has stood the test of time. But for others, it feels like a death sentence. Dave Grohl has openly admitted that he hates that Foo Fighters are now considered classic rock. Maybe the real message here is that rock music never truly dies. It just keeps evolving, whether we like it or not. So what do you guys think? Is classic rock just a specific period in time? Or is it a specific sound? Or is it a combination of these things? Or is there something else completely different that I've completely missed? Maybe classic rock is over from 2006. We say, thank you very much, 2006. After that, there's no more classic rock. We'll call it something else. We'll figure that out in the future. I have no idea, but I'd love to hear what you think in the comments. And other than that, please give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.